the podcast define leader and challenge the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Different podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today, the president and CEO of the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching Organization. He's a master coach. He helps organizations and their leaders. He specifically heads the global business unit of Marshall Goldsmith Coaching that supplies unparalleled executive leadership services for multinational organizations around the world. While leading the APAC and EMEA regions, Brandon became the youngest executive in this firm's history at the end of 2018. He was listed in the top 200 power list of biggest voices in leadership by LeadersHum in 2022 and has been a published author in the Worldwide Coaching magazine. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Much, Dan. It's my pleasure to be here. I've been a longtime fan of your show, and I'm eager to be here and support what you do.
Well, I'm excited to have you on, Brandon. You lead an organization of coaches that truly are making a difference in the world. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how we came to know each other. But one of the things that I love about your organization and full transparency for the listeners, I'm a Marshall Goldsmith certified stakeholder centered coach. As of about a week ago, I had the opportunity to go through your training program with the wonderful Bill Zeeb. But everyone at your organization that I've had the opportunity to meet, Brandon, it started with Frank Wagner. We met through LinkedIn. And when we talk about the history of Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching and Frank Wagner being such a pivotal part of it, the fact that we met through social media and we built a relationship, he introduced me to you and to Julian. We were able to introduce, back when I was still at Y Institute, the Y Discovery. There's so many Marshall Goldsmith coaches through that interaction, and we've kept in touch. So it made absolute perfect sense to me after building all the relationships that when I decided to become a coach, I wanted to work with Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching, and I have not been disappointed. Congratulations on the organization that you've built.
Thank you. We have some phenomenal world-class individuals who are so generous and so wise and experienced. Using Bill Z as an example, he is a serious top coach. He is one of the people that invests more than others in their own development. And he's one of those guys, every 6 to 12 months, if you talk to him, he's a totally different person because of how much he's learning. He's there every single week volunteering to mentor coaches like yourself coming through the program. And I couldn't say enough good things. And I don't have the vocabulary to fully express my appreciation for them. And you joining on board just reaffirms to me that our quality is only going up. So welcome to the network, formally and officially, Dan.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It was almost it really was a no-brainer. I work with all kinds of coaching organizations. So at Y Institute, we had a mission to help 1 billion people discover their why. And the best way we felt we could do that was to work with coaching organizations like Marshall Goldsmith, like John Maxwell, like ICF, like Action Coach. So we work with all of those organizations. But when I looked at what I bring to the table, what I wanted to bring is leadership coaching. And the way that Marshall Goldsmith's program works is really so well built to help leaders be better. So leading different is about leading better. You can lead like everyone else does, and you're going to get the results that everyone else gets. But when you look at leading different, the name of the podcast, we look at Why Not Leadership, which is the name of my company. We want to talk to leaders. We want to work with people like Brandon who are willing to say, why not? Why not do it differently? Why not be the youngest executive in the firm's history? why not lead the next era? So I'm sure you've had a lot of why not moments in your life, Brandon. How did you come to get involved with Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching?
I would describe my career very similar to the way Chris Coffey would, which is I'd use words like backwards, unintentionally, falling into it. It wasn't something sought out, but I'll say from a very early age, I was very interested, oddly interested, in fact, in leadership literature, leadership practices. I spent most of my formative years as a touring musician, and I've spent at least a decade and a half touring internationally, leading volunteer teams. So leadership was always kind of a part of things, and so was coaching. There's no more challenging job for a leader than leading volunteers, because there's very little, you really have to have a shared vision, and you have to have people who deeply, viscerally want that thing. So I've always had an interest in leadership. It's taken me to some fascinating things, and maybe in another discussion we could get deep into my my career trajectory. But I was at a point working in Asia. I was there for 10 years, and I was looking to change careers from where I was, and eyeballing an MBA as a vehicle to facilitate that. One of the singers in a band I was playing with, his wife, who became my first boss, was introduced to me through that singer. And they said, we've got this guy in this group. He's got a ridiculous work ethic. He loves to do what he loves to do. When he's doing something he loves, he's just an unstoppable force. Maybe you guys should give a look at him. And the company wasn't hiring at the time. There wasn't a position. When I joined, there wasn't a computer or a desk. They're like, here's a conference table, talk to people, figure out stuff to be done. And I kind of just sniffed out the worst problems and got super curious about it, poked at the problems some until I better understood them, and then took my curiosity online to find ways to solve the problems. And from there, I just kind of bounced around wherever there was a fire. I did what Coach Bill Summers like to recommend, is to start with firefighting, and then eventually work towards fireproofing. And that's what I did. And as I proofed each area, the business was growing exponentially. You can read more about this on my LinkedIn bio, of course. As we did this, I just sort of drifted into leadership and management roles. And I've believed so vehemently in our vision that, once the hooks were in, they were in. So as we talk about my YOS, you'll see just how aligned that is. But that's how I came to the organization. It was almost by accident. It was at an inflection point, and it happens to be a more convenient plan B that just took hold, gripped me, and has kept me occupied, interested, and enthusiastic ever since.
Man, I love that you brought in Bill Summers. So oh man, this is so great, Brandon. So Brandon, I was introduced to Frank Wagner through social media, but one of the people that said, "Hey, you've got to meet Frank," was Bill Summers, who is also a Y certified coach. He and Betty Burks they've created a whole fiefdom within Y Institute of certified coaches who work in the education realm. Bill has been a principal for I don't know how many high schools that he does. He's a masochist who does that fun. He literally likes to take over schools and turn them around. He's a tremendous leadership coach. So thank you for bringing that up, because those were the first two people that I ever met who were Marshall Goldsmith certified stakeholder centered coaches. So shout out to Bill Summers and Betty Burks, and thanks for bringing that up. There's a lot that you just brought up that I want to talk about. First of all, I could see, did you have long hair when you were in the band?
Oh, busted. Long hair, dreadlocks. It's been red and black, ball bearing necklaces, the wallet chains, the spikes on the wrist, all of the standard rebellious stuff. I mean, I'm going to tell you this, and for most people, it comes as an absolute surprise. To you, it's probably just going to make sense. But since I was even before a teenager, I have been absolutely deeply in love with metal music, just the darkest, hardest stuff. I really appreciate the music coming out of the Nordic countries. That's always been, a fascination to me, but it is that, this kind of goes along with my why of challenge. But yeah, that has always been a significant thing in my life. And I can see the threads through my entire upbringing all the way through adulthood where my why operating system has become painfully obvious. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate people like you and Bill Summer and Bill C, both who are certified with the YOS tool, for laying that groundwork to better understand myself, which I assume we'll get into deeper here as well.
Well, let's just go ahead and get into it because you've teased it out and it's so fun. As I was listening to your trajectory, so much like a person with the why of challenging the status quo. If we sit here and you look at Brandon and you look at his LinkedIn bio and you look at all his pages on the Marshall Goldsmith site, you look like such a buttoned up, very, by the book kind of guy. And then you look at your background and then you get to know and you realize this is a guy who likes to think outside the box. And then when you talk about the way you made your way in the company, so your why is to challenge the status quo, your how is to make sense. And you talked about the fact that you sat at that conference table and you looked for problems. That's what makes sense. People do really well. They love to solve problems. So while other people shy away from problems, makes sense. People kind of run towards them and say, okay, how do we solve that? And then you have a what of mastery, which means you take stuff and learn it at a deep level. So when you become passionate about something, leadership has been your thing. You really read every leadership book. I'm reading 10X is easier than 2X right now. I was gifted this by a friend over the week. I was in Phoenix. And I love reading leadership books, but I have a feeling I could never rival your knowledge because when mastery people like something, they learn as much as they can about it. So tell us about your, because you mentioned, and I do want to talk about leadership and leading volunteers because you mentioned your leadership journey began leading volunteers. So tell me how that led to then wanting to learn more about leadership and becoming a stakeholder executive helping other leaders.
Wow, what a synopsis for what I need to speak on now. This is great. Where to begin? I've always been a very active, very, very active individual. I've been called like Tron. It just doesn't want to stop because, as you said, when I'm passionate about something, I can't turn it off. And I mean that in a good way. It's not like it's something that plagues me, but it's an itch. And I'll tell you a little bit how these interact as a precursor to the story. If I find something worth challenging, or if I see something that is unchallenged and needs to be challenged, because anything unchallenged, I think, should be to some degree challenged with some obvious parameters. The next natural step is to make sense of it, understand what it is the way it is before you can go in and challenge it. And some things that have guided my thought, I'll butcher the quote, but it was something to the effect of a man who knows little of his opponent's, in an argument sense, knows little of his opponent's argument, also knows very little of his own. So even again, as an early age, I start thinking, if I'm going to have a deeply held opinion, well, I need to understand this from all angles before I'm even allowed to have that strong opinion. And so that thrill of making sense, or I should say the pursuit of making sense under the thrill of challenge, has been a guiding force. And I'd almost venture to say that mastery happens by accident, because I don't necessarily pursue mastery the way a typical specialist would. I'm through and through a utility player as a generalist. But mastery happens through making sense, which happens because of challenge. So coming all the way back to how I got into leadership was I was a musician, and I picked up, I grew up in a musical household, but I got my first guitar, right at the cusp of becoming a teenager, and I couldn't put it down. I I'm a social butterfly, and all of my friends sort of melted into the peripherals, and it was just guitar every day. So I was logging during school days, 7 to 9 hours of practice, during weekends and summer, 13 hours a day, nonstop. And I never had a curriculum. I never down in a book or took classes. I wonder what happens if I do this. What if I play it this other way? What if I brought in, my father was a drummer, so I grew up behind a drum kit. What if I brought in these rhythmic elements to the guitar? Would it sound a little different? So discovering my way through this, and then when I would play with others, I became almost a default leader in saying, let's try it this way, let's try it this way. And this spurred an interest in production. It spurred an interest in, if I'm going to explain this keyboard line, I really need to learn to play it. If I'm going to, guide the singers, I need to learn to sing. And so I became a multi-instrumentalist, and continuous, I wonder if we could do this differently, not better, just differently for whatever reason. Let's make sense of it, and let's make sense of it by picking up these other instruments. Now that mastery starts to come along. And at this time, I'm proficient in guitar, drums, bass, keyboard, vocals, production, and sound engineering. And so that put me into positions of leadership by accident that I didn't seek, I didn't want, I didn't crave, and I don't necessarily resent, but I really wanted to apply my craft. And so, over the years, this turned into producing albums. This turned into touring, locally, playing at festivals. It turned into international touring. That's what first took me to Mexico, Japan, and Korea, and then falling in love with kimchi and Korean people and the culture. And so this thread of sort of being thrust into leadership positions became a commonality with whatever I was doing. And that occurred in sports, it occurred in music, it occurred in various areas. As I got into the Marshall Goldsmith ecosystem, it also happened naturally. So I was hired to sort of decompress some of the workload of my manager. And it's like, I'm noticing you're getting these threads about this particular question from prospects looking to buy one of our services. What if we did this a little different in our marketing? Okay, well, now let's go learn the principles of marketing and the tools and et cetera. Okay, well, this really needs to be handled by sales. So a couple of years later, I'm over and working in sales. Okay, well, it seems like our finance and our packing of products and shipping them to customers could be improved. And let's look at this. And so kind of going place to place and establishing best practices gave me the, let's say, the social equity to have influence with the people. And as my managers, I couldn't thank them enough for just watching me and saying, maybe you need to, take this function under your wing. That pattern sort of built the staircase to where I am with stakeholder center coaching right now. I will be the absolute first to say that I'm so disproportionately fortunate to have the opportunities that I do, to have the influence that I do. And the thing that brings me the most joy about it is that I can find great people like you, like Bill Summers, like Bill Zeeb, like Inderjeet Singh, like so many of our coaches, and give them the platform that I was given to self-actualize and to really bring stakeholder-centered leadership to everyone. Because our vision is that everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. That can't be done by one person or a handful of people or an executive team. We need thousands of coaches like-minded with a similar work ethic, similar drive to actually go out there and move that needle forward. So that's kind of how I came into leadership. It was never something I aspired to. Even as a musician, I used a pseudonym, which we won't discuss here because I never wanted to be a face. I wanted to be a sound. And leadership sort of happened by accident. I don't regret it nor resent it, but it was certainly not something that I set out to achieve, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense, Brandon. Thank you so much for sharing that. Here's the other cool thing that again, it's so interesting to see your why operating system just come into the stories. You talked about how when you first started, you said, "Hey, what if we did something different?" right? Let's challenge the way it's been done. One of the things I know, and you have a very unique top 3 of challenge, make sense, and mastery. One of the and you've mentioned it already. Before you challenge, you do your homework. And so I pity the person that you challenge if they're not prepared, because I know this: if the challenge is coming, you've done the homework. I'm coaching a young executive right now who is challenge mastery trust, and so. But I said to the team and the executive team, yes, he's challenged. He's going to come at you with out of the box and different ideas. But before he comes to you with that, he's going to have done his homework before he gets to that. And so you just need to be prepared, because when he throws those ideas out, there's going to be some depth to them. And so I'm sure that's played a part in your success in the leadership circle. You mentioned leading volunteers. Tell us about that part of your life, because I was in the military, and in the U.S., as you know, we're a volunteer army. So I led volunteers into some really tough situations, and we had to do some tough things. But you're probably talking about different kinds of volunteers. Tell us about what unique challenges you had when you're leading volunteers, and you don't hold a pen to fire them. You can't fire volunteers, right? And you can't hold back their pay because they're volunteering. So I'm sure there were some unique challenges to that. And how did you succeed?
Yeah, boy, what a topic. I'll stay with music, but I do have to stress just how little of a role that plays in my life now, right? That was very distinctly who I was for many years, until we challenged the utility of staying with it. Leading volunteers, stay with music and say it's very difficult when there's not, let's say, concrete leverage, right? With the military, people are conscripted with certain flavors of compliance that have to be maintained. And there are very clear reporting lines and consequences for insubordination. When you're leading volunteers the way I was, you don't have that. There's no formal mechanism. There's no organizational levers that you can use to, for lack of better word, exert influence when necessary. And so when you reach a point where push comes to shove, all you really have is the, let's say, the social and visionary lever to pull. And so if you are seeking a particular vision, and I'll give you, let's say that we're performing for a fundraising event, which we did a whole lot of. We did a lot of let's say, social outreach, where we would go and perform and put on concerts for places and take donations for housing or something to these effects. We were there right after Katrina, as an example, although that does date me just a little bit, I suppose. When you need some leverage, you need to be able to go back to that vision and say, unless we find a way to work together cohesively here, the people that we currently exist to serve will be underserved. And that's not something I'm willing to have on my conscience. Now, if I'm a master of my domain, in this particular case, I absolutely am. I am able to say, we can do without drums, for example. Like if we're having a headbutting moment with a drummer, we can do it without drums. It is never going to be as good as it could be, or as it should be, or as what we have promised the people who have come out to hear this. But it is not going to affect people's willingness to serve those we are here to serve. So if you would like to have on your conscience that we have overpromised and underdelivered, or if you would like to have on your conscience that you made a compromise in an area that you don't, it's your choice. But you do have to make the choice. And so understanding, like you said, doing your homework and having the, let's say, the agility, the adaptability, and the quick thinking enough to adjust on the fly when necessary is absolutely critical to being able to lead volunteers, especially when there's a social impact behind the initiative that you're putting forward. And that's the only real way. And this, of course, is the most difficult of situations. This isn't every bump along the road you go straight to the nuclear button. But the way that you create that is you have to draw and magnetize people who believe in that mission. And if you can get them, that becomes your most potent force to navigate the social complexities and get people inspired to take action towards a goal that you all equally share.
Well, you mentioned something that I think is very, very crucial to successful leadership, and that's courage. The courage to say to that drummer, hey, you know what? This is our mission. We're here to put on a performance that's ultimately going to help thousands of people, hundreds of people, however many people you're impacting. And it's not going to be as good as it could be if we had a drummer. But you have the courage to say, you know what, we can do this without a drummer. And now you have the choice whether you want to be a part of this or not. So let's dig into that a little bit, because one of the things I learned at Y Institute, and one of the things I preach as a leader, is when you tell people what you believe, you attract people who believe what you believe. And so even in your YOS, you know, when you first learn your results, the first sentence is, I believe that success happens when we challenge the status quo and think differently. So if you lead with that, and then you're going to attract people that are willing to do things outside the box and differently. How you do that is by helping people make sense of the complex and challenging. And then ultimately what you deliver are solutions that have breadth and depth. And so if you communicate to everyone that you meet, hey, this is the way Brandon operates. He's going to challenge you. He's going to help you solve problems, and he's going to bring breadth and depth to the solutions that he brings. You know who you're working with. And then you volunteer to be a part of it. You know that at some point you're going to get challenged. You're going to be asked to make sense of, hey, wait a minute, what problem are we solving? And you're going to be asked to make sure that you don't just bring out half-cooked, half-baked ideas. You're going to be asked for depth and breadth. So tell me how your YOS matches what your stakeholders, your position at stakeholder-centered coaching.
Yes, and if you would permit me a minor detour from trespassing on the prompt.
You bet.
Because it's something that you also introduced me to some years ago, but it has not just shaped my thinking about running business. I should say it's not just shaped my thinking about interpreting my YOS, but it has shaped the way, for example, that we'll do copywriting, or the way that I'll produce content. You say that when your why, your how, your what, when you talk about your vision, when it's clear, you attract the right people. What you told me is not only do you attract the right people, you repel the wrong people. You repel the wrong people. And I think that's such a powerful gift that you have given me, and I want to share with your audience, is that not only do you bring the absolute most right person into your pocket, but you make sure that your pocket is never filled with people who disagree or have, not disagree, people who aren't fully bought in to the direction you're going. And there is always, minor deviations, and that is not just accepted, it is sought out and appreciated, because we need creative abrasion to get the best ideas, but you repel the wrong people. And I want to encourage anyone out there who is thinking about your why, thinking about taking the YOS with Dan, which I absolutely recommend. It has changed things from the way that I'll run business, to the way that I'll parent my children, to the way that I invest in the relationship that I have with my very best friend in the world, my wife. So absolutely keep in mind, it will bring the right people along, but equally, perhaps as much of a benefit is making sure that you're not wasting time with people who aren't fully bought into the same thing that you are. So Dan, thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen who are listening at home, take that, put it in your pocket, because it is a nugget of wisdom.
I really appreciate that, Brandon. And I love that you remember that from years ago when we talked about it, because one of the things I do when I take somebody through the process is I say, imagine yourself in a room full of your ideal clients. And you stand up and you say, hey, I believe that success happens when we challenge the status quo. And how I do that is by making sense of the complex and challenging. And what I bring are solutions with depth and breadth. Half the room is going to love it. Half the room is not. And you want to work with the half that loves it. The ones that are going to come up to you at the end of your keynote, and they're going to come up and say, hey, I want to hear more about how you challenge the status quo. I want to hear more about how you solve problems. I want to hear more about how you bring depth and breadth. And the people that don't want it, they're just going to say, you know what, that's not for me. And that's okay, right? In the book I'm reading, Dan Sullivan talks about the 80-20. So you work with the 20% that really resonate with you, and you let go of the 80% that don't. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
I want to say you not only let them go, but you serve them. This is about service. We are in a service industry. You serve them by saying, hey, you are welcome to be here. You are welcome to join my circle. You are welcome to ride this wave with me. You're also welcome to stand back and save yourself the headache of not doing this. So not only are you informing them, giving them some manner of informed consent, if you're by me at this party, here's what we're going to be doing and talking about. You serve them by saying, this probably isn't going to bring a lot of joy to you. It's probably not a good use of your time. And so these days, Dan, part of your influence is that if I am at a social event and someone comes over and, let's say they want to talk about movies and pop culture and such, awesome. I'm so excited that brings you joy. It does not for me. If we want to be together, I'm going to ask you why you like that artist. What is it about their, let's say their music that speaks to you? What is it about their peers that don't? I want to understand this, but I don't want to share, the ending to this TV show because that's just not for me. And as off-putting as that sounds as a story, people will frequently be like, that is so cool. Tell me more about that. Some people will say, I get it, man. I absolutely get it. I'm going to go get some punch. Like, life is good. So thank you for the detour. I'll come back to your original question, which is how my position and my why operating system align. I don't know if this aligns naturally or if it's sort of been bent into shape, but I see an almost linear alignment, almost parallel to a very large degree. Stakeholder-centered coaching is by definition quite a contrarian concept, right? Most coaching starts at the inside. Most leadership assessments start with your inside. YOS starts with your inside. What's your attitude? What's your perspectives? What's your paradigm? How authentic do you show up? What are your motivators and your drivers? And that's all great. And the idea is if you can calibrate that internally, that will eventually radiate out to your behaviors, and eventually that will be observed by others. Stakeholder-centered coaching goes the opposite. It says, Dan, as a leader, you are paid for how you behave. The organization does not care how you feel about this project. They care how you behave, and that the way you behave reaches that conclusion. That is phenomenally contrarian, and I'll tell you, it gives a massive headache to my research teams, to my academic teams who are like, well, is this a leadership development process? It is. Why do we call it a coaching process? Because people don't do it. You need a coach to help you do this. 5% of people can look at the model and say, I get it. I'm going to do it. Alan Mulally was one of those. Very few people are. And so first challenge, hey, we are not just challenging an entire industry of coaching. We're challenging the industry of leadership, the industry of employee engagement, the industry of communication, of facilitation and training. But if you're going to do that, you better come with your homework. You better have all of the research done. You better be conducting new research to stay ahead of the game. You need to be producing that and making it public so that people can see you're not just having a nice idea, you're actually empirically backing that up. And as you're doing that, you need to establish mastery in this very niche that you understand. You need to apply making sense to the fringe, and fringe meaning anything outside of that niche that you're working on. That's other coaching models, methodologies, leadership processes. And you have to have mastery of how you describe what you've made sense and why you are challenging the status quo. So for me, this is frankly a job, a dream come true. It's a dream job for me. But that's not the best thing. The best thing that I enjoy about this job is working with great people who are, of course, we've got phenomenal leaders in our network, but we have incredible coaches who are here every day showing up to change the world in a measurable way. And no other coaching group, no other leadership group can make that claim, but we're backing it up. And we are each becoming masters one day at a time, just like yourself.
Wow. And you know what? That so resonates. And I really appreciate. I was wondering how you were going to tie it together. And it really does. There's a reason, because you and I shared two of our top three. I'm contribute, challenge, make sense. So I have challenge and make sense in my YOS. And there's a reason this appealed to me, because it's such a different way of going about it. And if it's different, I want to do it. I want to try it. Plus, it's fun. I've already had, I mentioned to you in the pre-show, I'm already talking to potential clients and going through even the interview process. There's three things that Mike McCartney, when I talked to him before my first client call, I said, hey, listen, I'm going to talk to someone that I'm thinking that is going to sign on with me. And he reminded me of three things we learned in training and asking those questions of the client. Make sure that they have the courage to go through this. They're going to have the courage to look inside and to hear the feedback that they're going to get. They're going to have the humility to take that feedback and implement it and learn from it. And that they're going to also have the discipline to do something with it after they get that. And it was so valuable. It just has become a cornerstone of almost every conversation that I have with a coaching client. I need to know, where do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on these three very important topics? Because if you're not an 8 to 10, we've got some work to do before I even can start working with you. And again, it's more about, hey, this is what I believe. I need to know that you're somebody that's interested in you have the courage. You're going to be humble enough to accept the feedback. And more importantly, you're going to have the discipline to implement it. So again, one of those things it's in one of the lessons, it's in three of the lessons. It just stuck with me. And it's so very important. And so I can see why it all comes together. We've been talking for 36 minutes. This is going to be a longer form show. And that's okay, because you brought up some great stuff, Brandon. I want to ask you a question that I think is going to be very interesting to our listeners. So our listeners are leaders and coaches from around the world. But tell us about your biggest why not moment, a time in your life that you said why not to something, and you're so glad you did it. In the show intro, we talk about the fact that, at the end of our life, we don't regret the things we did. Nobody on their deathbed says, oh, I'm so glad I did this. They regret the things they didn't do. I wish I had done X. So they wish they'd said why not to something. Tell us something you said why not to. You're glad you did because it's worked out so well. Your biggest one.
I mean, it would probably be marrying my wife, or maybe I should say coaxing her to fall in love with me is probably a bigger way. We could not be bigger polar opposites, and that also shows up in our Y operating systems, which I won't share hers because it's not mine to share. But we are opposites in every way. The day that I met her was the day I fell in love. I told her that on the day. I mean, I didn't tell her, hey, I'm in love with you now. But I said, like, there's a natural attraction. And by the way, you check all my boxes. So I'm in this. I'm quite serious about this. If you want to pursue this as well. And she's like, yeah, okay, sure. Why not? Like, okay. It wasn't on her mind. It wasn't, she wasn't out looking for that. But then 5, 6, 7 years of dating, and now 15 or 16 years being together, there's never been a moment more that I've put myself out there, because this is also challenge. I'm going to challenge and say that this is not the typical route to go about things, but you check the things on my list. If you're willing to give me space to prove that maybe I am checking the things on your list too, we'll make sense of it together. And if we do, we're going to get really, really dang good at this. And so we have cycles of continuous improvement at home. And Brandon here is working on his behaviors. We've got a whiteboard up there with our feed forwards and our action plans and everything. Stakeholder-centered coaching is as effective in the boardroom as it is in a marriage, as it is in the classroom, as Bill Summers is showing us, as it is for patients engaging with their hospital staff. So my big why not moment, where I stuck myself out there, challenged things, found a way to make sense, and then have committed myself to mastery, has absolutely been in my marriage.
Wow, Brandon. Now, I'm going to have to probably edit that out because every guest going forward is going to want to have this amazing answer. That was number one. It's a great answer. I wish I'd have thought of it, and the other people have had other significant why not moments. But I think you just got some major bonus points in the Mergard household. So congratulations on that, and congratulations on your 15 years of marriage. Obviously, it's a very good decision that you made, and probably a great decision on her part. So good job on I think you took us through the sales process there too, which is, in our family, Brandon, we have a line. I have an adult daughter that doesn't live with us anymore. She's married and it's got her own home. But our 12-year-old and my wife and I, we recently adopted something we called "You're already at no." So when it comes to going for something, asking for something, asking for the sale, of course, Dad's in business development. So, she was afraid of asking one of her teachers if they could do something. And of all people, my wife, who's also a polar opposite of me, she turns to her and he says, "Sophia, you're already at no. So why not just ask? You're already at no. You've got to know. If you don't ask, you're there. So why not ask? And if he says no, guess what? It's where you were already." So, man, what a great answer, Brandon. What do you say we end the show on that note?
Why not?
Thank you so much, Brandon. You have been an amazing guest. Like I said, we went over on time, but I think this was such well-spent time. You provided us with some amazing wisdom. I loved hearing the backstory, where you came from. I don't know if I'll have to scrub the internet or maybe contact Rika and see if I can get some pictures of Brandon in the band, but that might have to be in our promos for this interview.
It could be, Dan. And as we wrap, I just have to say it has been some years since we've known each other. Actually, Frank introduced me to the idea of us connecting at least a year, if not two, prior to that. But I have been very fortunate to see how you have taken some of our top coaches, like Dr. Bill Summers, like Bill Zeeb, through the YOS, sharing it with their clients, giving that same impact that I've also received, and then extending your capability towards mastery by becoming stakeholder-centered coaching certified, learning the additional skills, and then finding a unique blend of leveraging people's why operating system within stakeholder-centered coaching. So I am phenomenally interested and eager to observe what you do with this skill set, as well as how it affects the community. I think that we're going to have a very long and prosperous time working together. So thank you for the service that you're giving to the coaching and leadership industry and for the contributions you've already made to our community. It's very meaningful.
Well, thank you, Brandon. I am honored to be a part of the community. I am honored to have you in my circle, and I am sure that our listeners are going to get a ton of value out of this interview. So thank you for being a guest on the Lead Different podcast.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.